Hello, everyone, and welcome to SQW. In your cast, episode 1, Undertaken, My Heart. This will be a much shorter than usual show. It's just me today, JJ. I'm the Todd Pettingale to your uh, Vince McMahon on this particular outing. It's more going to be a history show. Uh, Brief. I'm going to try to keep it at a half an hour. Won't get through all of what I plan on doing today, but we will do as much as we can with WrestleMania just wrapping up. We potentially lost The Undertaker as an active competitor on the WWE roster, and I figured it would be fun to go through the history of Mark Calloway, but as The Undertaker. We're not going to go back to WCW or whatever he did, USWA, all those things. The Undertaker as a character, more or less, since his debut in the WWF to however long 30 minutes gets me today. This will not be more than 2 episodes probably, but my goal is to make these relatively regular, particularly if me, John, and Dolly can't get a show out during the week. It may not always be solo. I may bring in some friends here or there to talk about a very specific history, not just like the broad WrestleMania, SummerSlam, shows like that. Very dedicated to a particular event, a storyline, or in this case, a wrestler that just retired for, as far as we know. The Undertaker is retiring. So I feel we will just get right to it right now. Um, in the end of November, uh, Calloway made his debut in the WWF, originally on Superstars. He was using the name Kane the Undertaker. They quickly dropped that. The original gimmick of him was to look more like a Tombstone era mortician, very old Wild West style, spats and the Stetson hats and um, gloves and what have you. And the crux of the gimmick was he was impervious to pain. He no sold all the moves. I'm sure that made a lot of people excited to wrestle the Undertaker. That no matter what they did, he was going to just not sell whatever move they threw at him. He was originally introduced as a mystery partner for Survivor Series um, in November, a couple days after his debut. He made his in-ring debut for the WWF. He was in the Survivor Series as sort of his national debut for the company, as a bad guy being managed by Brother Love, part of Ted DiBiase's sort of group. So the like 1 minute into his match, he immediately takes out Coco Beware with the tombstone. He took out Dusty Rhodes and was counted out. That was the first viewing of The Undertaker. So early Undertaker was mostly brought in to be I don't know, like he wasn't dead yet. So that was sort of the thing. Like he was just strong. He was just it was implied more or less that he was, for lack of a better word, zombie. I don't know exactly what they were trying to get across with it, but there we go. They dropped the Kane name almost instantly. It obviously would later come back into the character's storyline, but a cool thing that he did originally, after he would beat his opponents, was wrap them up in a body bag. If you watch early WWF footage on the network and what have you, you'll see the Undertaker will beat always jobbers. It was always jobbers early on for the Undertaker, but he would beat them, put them in a body bag, and carry them off. And there were always squash matches, and it was incredibly fun. He was in his first Royal Rumble in '91, which would have been just 2 months after his debut. His first feud was with Jimmy Snuka. That was his first real feud in the company. So recently passed Jimmy Snuka. So um, his first couple of years in the company, they shot him to the moon right away. Um, he his first WrestleMania was WrestleMania 7, where he completed his the start of the streak. Win one was against Superfly Jimmy Snuka in his feud that he was having with him at the time. So that was sort of his christening in the company, was to beat Jimmy Snuka. Um, he immediately had a major feud out the gate with the Ultimate Warrior as well, his manager, and they had some fun um, promos and what have you to going against the Ultimate Warrior in the whole casket situation. Um, they had a body bag match that uh, the Undertaker lost to the Ultimate Warrior, which is like sort of an early sort of idea for the casket match that would come later for the Undertaker. Undertaker didn't create the casket match, but it obviously makes the most sense for the Undertaker to be in a casket match. It's obvious, like the Hell in a Cell, like that just seems like an Undertaker kind of match. It may not have been a match, a cage with a top to it isn't something created for the Undertaker, but when you name it like Hell in a Cell, obviously it becomes synonymous with the Undertaker, even if he hasn't been in that many Hell in a Cell matches comparatively. Um, uh, Eventually, the Undertaker's early, I know we're talking very early into his career, um, he beat Hulk Hogan at Survivor Series for the WWF Championship. So this would be uh, the big break for the Undertaker. It wasn't a long title reign at all, and it was more of an ends to a means between Ric Flair and Hulk Hogan and the feud that they were trying to build up between the two. Um, there was an immediate rematch just less than a week later on a Tuesday in Texas, and he lost it to Hogan. Uh, but there was controversy around that whole situation in storyline, obviously, and the matches were sort of all had funniness going on. The Ric Flair interfered and all that things. So the title was vacated shortly thereafter, and that's when you have Royal Rumble 1992, um, where Ric Flair won the Royal Rumble for his first WWF championship. Um, After this played out, Undertaker sort of created an alliance with Jake the Snake Roberts. A very fun sort of alliance they had going on. Jake the Snake was feuding with Randy Savage at the time, and uh, I'm sorry, I'm just reading my notes, and that didn't make any sense what I was what I had written here. Um, so this is early '92. Let's see, the Undertaker's allied with Jake Roberts. He tried to attack Randy Savage, and Undertaker stopped him, made Undertaker face at this point. Um, at this point, he started a feud with Jake Roberts. It was just the Undertaker had like a Piper's Pit segment with Paul Bearer called the Funeral Parlor, and they ended up having a match at WrestleMania 8. Um, it the interactions are better than maybe the match itself, because Jake Roberts is a perfect sort of like the way he gives promos is great for somebody as dour as the Undertaker, who doesn't give promos. You have Paul Bearer with his promo style, maybe not as maybe a little more over the top than Jake Roberts, more restrained, methodical speaking at his opponent, but very good interactions between them all. Um, uh, this is where the Undertaker sort of falls into a rut afterwards. Basically, through 92 and 93, Undertaker was basically feuding with Harvey Whippleman. Just the managers that Harvey Whippleman was managing at the time. So Kamala, that's where you get Giant Gonzalez. Everyone remembers Giant Gonzalez. That was his WrestleMania 9 opponent. Big naked bodysuit giant of a man. Funny side story. Giant Gonzalez was supposed to go to WCW during Hogan's whole run there within 95, 96. The Yeti was going to be Giant Gonzalez. That's why he was wrapped up like a mummy at first, so they could hide that it wasn't Giant Gonzalez because he was having travel issues getting into America. But it obviously didn't pan out. So I don't know what Yetis and mummies have in common, but WCW didn't care either. That was WrestleMania 9. So as you can see, Undertaker was just being the Undertaker at this point. There was no after the Hogan situation and the Jake Roberts situation, it was just sort of sideshow kind of things. It's the Undertaker and Kamala and stuff like that. He was a fan favorite. The fans loved him. Everyone was super into him, but he didn't really have a good foil at the time until they finally brought him against Yokozuna. Yokozuna was massive, both literally and figuratively, in the company at the time. He was WWF champion. So Royal Rumble 1994 is where you have a casket match between Yokozuna and The Undertaker. And they literally have all of the heels come out to the locker room and kill The Undertaker. They beat him up bad. He can't survive. They lock him into the casket. And then you have the footage from inside the casket and The Undertaker floating away into the sky, promising that he will return. Now, obviously, they didn't kill him. He was just hurt. He had a back injury, needed it to heal. And that's where The Undertaker went for several months. So he missed WrestleMania 10 at the time. So that's The Undertaker, one of the few WrestleManias The Undertaker has missed since he's joined the WWE, WWF. Only missed a handful at this point now, but which is impressive considering how many his streak in his career has had at this point. But after WrestleMania 10 is where you get the fake Undertaker. Ted DiBiase is like, I'm bringing the Undertaker back, and they had Brian Lee dress up as the Undertaker. They would have who's actually the Undertaker's cousin in real life. If you read the dirt sheets from the time, you'll hear that when they called up Brian Lee, they were telling him, don't go out in the sun. You need to be pale. And this is before we knew it was going to be a fake Undertaker. It's really fun to go back if you read old Wrestling Observer's, old Meltzer rags. So they had they even had the Undertaker talking for Brian Lee at the few times they had the Undertaker talk. It was a nice touch, really. Sort of sent home this could be the Undertaker. Doesn't quite look like him, but it definitely sounds like him. And so they had Leslie Nielsen doing packages trying to find the Undertaker, basically reprising his role as Drebin from the Naked Gun series, and he just really leaned into it and really kind of made it fun for such a stupid storyline. It was stupid. It wasn't a good match. At SummerSlam, the main event for that particular SummerSlam. At this point, he really was sort of the Deadman at this point. Like from here on out, it's sort of implied that he was actually killed then, and he's back as sort of the undead. They start calling him the Deadman, things like that. Changed his colors um, to purple. So instead of the gloves and the spats, they were now, instead of gray, they were purple. So making him much less imposing, I guess, less threatening, I suppose, to play into the baby face that they were having him do. Um, he's decimated Brian Lee and came back, and at that Survivor Series that later that year, he beat Yokozuna in a casket match as sort of his retribution. Um, and then basically from there on out, for most of the next year, it was the $1 Million Man was sort of his focus, and it really was a major focus of the Undertaker. The $1 Million Corporation, I suppose. WrestleMania 11, Undertaker wrestled King Kong Bundy, part of the stable, and Kama, who we know as the Godfather nowadays, Papa Shango. At the time, he was Kama, the Ultimate Fighting Machine, I think was his nickname. It was just to be a playoff of UFC was just starting out and was super big at the time, and they sort of wanted to lean into mixed martial arts, so they repackaged Papa Shango as Kama, and he stole the urn that Paul Bearer had been wandering around with all this time. That was holding the Undertaker's secret power all this time. Never, but yeah, he turned it into a chain that he would wear. And I remember as a kid, that was like that's the biggest insult possible for the Undertaker. How dare he? How dare he turn that urn into a chain? That's so disrespectful. Like you really wanted to see Kama get his head punched in at this point. And shortly thereafter, he wrestles Kama in a casket match and beats him. He got injured again at this point, but it was an orbital fracture in his eye. So at this point, the Undertaker started wearing a spooky, like Phantom of the Opera style mask over, but for both sides, kind of situated to protect his face. And it was really kind of spooky looking. It actually looked really cool. I liked it. I liked that look. You don't see it pop up very often. They've made a couple of action figures with the mask, but it was so short lived at this point that that it's sort of just a footnote in the Undertaker's, obviously. But it was a good look for the Undertaker. I understand that he wasn't a masked wrestler, but it was a good look for the Undertaker. At this point, at Royal Rumble, the Undertaker was in a championship match against Bret Hart. This would have been Royal Rumble 1996 at this point. I think we talked about this very recently on the show. Diesel came out. This is towards the end of Diesel's time in the WWF. He was leaving soon to go to WCW with Scott Hall. And so this led into a feud with Diesel leading into WrestleMania 12, where Undertaker extends his streak again, cleanly beating Diesel at WrestleMania 12. And then this is where you start getting into the Undertaker. This is where the Undertaker is officially sort of the face of the company. Shortly after this, you have Mankind makes his debut, and he immediately is in a program with the Undertaker from the get-go, and it is a forever feud for the Undertaker. It feels like from here on out, as long as Mick Foley's around, the Undertaker's always sort of in the background of his career, and vice versa. Like the two are unseparable at this point. That's not even a word, but inseparable. That's the word. but Undertaker kept getting ambushed by Mankind. Um, they were fighting everywhere in the arena, whatever they can. The Undertaker got his he was in wrestling for the Intercontinental Championship at In Your House. That's at around this time, and he was screwed out of that. Mick Foley, Mankind screwed him out of that. Um, and so at that SummerSlam of 96, yeah, Boiler Room Brawl between The Undertaker and Mankind. Um, and the big takeaway from this was The Undertaker was turned on by Paul Bearer. And Paul Bearer hit Undertaker with the urn, um, knocking him down. And Mick Foley, Mankind, was able to drop the mandible claw on him and beat him. That was a big deal. Mankind beating The Undertaker was a pretty big deal for the WWF fans at the time. That led into a Buried Alive match. Um, Another Undertaker mainstay. He would pop up from time to time as the big blow off to Undertaker feuds, Hell in a Cell, casket matches, Buried Alive matches. These are the big blow off matches for Undertaker. That's when you know it's a serious feud for the Undertaker, and they sort of want it to be sort of part of his overall history, this particular feud that he's going through. So you'll have them have the blow off matches being in these particular gimmicks. They tried to do it with the Inferno match, but it didn't really pan out. We'll get to that later. But yeah, the In Your House, Buried Alive was the title of that particular pay per view. It was okay match. Undertaker lost it. The Executioner, who wasn't around very much, somehow got an action figure at the time, but he didn't lose the match. He was buried alive in that match, but he did get Undertaker did win the match by choke slamming him into the grave. But a bunch of wrestlers came out and buried him into the match after that. At this point is where the Undertaker's career shifts again. So we already had the Mortician era, the original thing. We had the purple Deadman era, and now we're going into the Lord of Darkness era at this point, where his look changes again, gets rid of the sort of this Mortician look, the spats and the tie, and all of that stuff. Uh, Still feuding with Mick Foley at this point. I kind of want to stop it here because if I get into this particular 2 years of The Undertaker's career, we're going to be here for another hour. And I want to keep these short and sweet and simple. And I'm thinking about a half hour is really good for that. That way you can sort of make them sort of encyclopedic at a point. Like you can just, this is phase one of The Undertaker's career. This is the gloves and tie era of The Undertaker. And next we're going to get into the sort of the Lord of Darkness slash pretty much leading up to the Ministry of Darkness. And I'll probably cut it, maybe dig into the Ministry of Darkness a little bit. It wasn't a particularly long era of The Undertaker. Just like the the biker Undertaker, Big Evil era of The Undertaker wasn't particularly long. I think as sort of the Deadman now, the sort of recent Undertaker is probably the longest. He's sort of stuck with a look for a while. So, but yeah, join me next time for In Your Cast, episode 2. I don't know when that'll be. Probably next week. Probably this time next week. I feel like a Raw pre-show kind of situation works pretty well. You can find us on Twitter at SQW Podcast. You can find me on Twitter at the_double_J. And I don't want to be talking out of turn, but you can listen to us probably this Thursday. That's when we try. We try Thursdays. Doesn't always work out, but we try Thursdays. Um, I might bring a friend with me next week. We'll see. Fingers crossed. But yeah, thanks for listening, and